People are already starting to line up outside the Supreme Court, camping out in the Washington chill to hear arguments in a pair of high-profile same-sex marriage cases starting Tuesday. The justices will spend 2 days on the cases, which potentially could decide the rights of same-sex couples. Joining us from Connecticut, Nicole Wallace, former advisor to President George W. Bush, who supports same-sex marriage. And here in Washington, Gary Bauer, president of the group American Values, who opposes it. And welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Nicole, you and more than 100 other prominent Republicans have filed a brief in the Supreme Court case in which you argue the court should overturn Proposition 8. That was a constitutional amendment approved by California voters, which said that marriage, only marriage between a man and a woman is valid. You want to overturn that. Explain to us why your position is consistent with conservative values.
Well, look, first of all, the people who will stand before the United States Supreme Court are Ted Olson, who was President Bush's Solicitor General, one of the most respected legal minds in the country on the right, and David Boies, who represented President Gore in the recount. So this is a conservative legal argument that they will be advancing. They will basically lay out the conservative case that there is not any place in the Constitution that allows for a different set of rules for a different class of people. There's also a moral imperative here. If you believe, if you value and treasure and revere the institution of marriage, then you should want every family unit to be really wrapped in marriage. And if you believe that children are best raised in families where both of their parents are married, then there is certainly no other answer than to overturn something like Prop 8, which would deny an entire class of people access to this revered institution.
All right, Gary, conservatives like Nicole and Ted Olson, a very conservative lawyer, in his brief on her side to overturn Prop 8, say that same-sex marriage advances limited government, individual freedom, and family values.
Yes, Chris. Well, look, you don't advance limited government by being an anti-democratic movement that is attempting to take this issue away from the American people. What the brief is asking for, and what the groups waiting outside the Supreme Court are asking for, is for unelected judges to deny the people of the states the right to decide what marriage is in their state. Over 30 states in this country have voted that marriage is between a man and a woman, and of course the votes are only being held because there's been this radical movement in the last couple decades that's trying to redefine marriage. So it's a profoundly unconservative thing. In fact, it's the kind of brief that Nicole and the others have signed that I would expect from liberal Democrats let me just finish the sentence, who have used the courts for the last 30 years to force radical social change time and time again.
So are you saying then that you would oppose a striking down of a right to same-sex marriage? You want to leave it in the state legislatures?
Well, look, I would prefer that every state in the union keep the definition of marriage that's prevailed in Western civilization for a couple thousand years. That doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I certainly at this point would prefer the people of the states to make the decision as they have. And by the way, Chris, it's worth mentioning that the brief that Nicole is supporting, which supports the judge, the Prop 8 judge, somebody ought to read his decision. His animus, his hostility to people of faith was disgusting.
All right. He's not here to defend himself, but people can read it if they want. The other case that the court will hear, and there are two big cases, involves the Defense of Marriage Act, which President Clinton signed in 1996, which bans federal marital benefits for same-sex couples who are legally married in their states. You have acknowledged that states have the right to declare, to decide that same-sex marriage is legal. As a conservative, isn't marriage a state issue, and therefore should federal interference, wouldn't that be unconstitutional?
Well, I don't think so, and neither did a Democratic president, and overwhelming majority.
He now has changed his mind on
Well, of course, a lot of people are changing their minds because there's been a full court blitz by the popular culture, by elites, by all kinds of folks to intimidate and to cower people and to no longer defending marriage as being between a man and a woman. By the way, one other quick point.
Let me bring. Go ahead, Nicole.
Chris, the biggest problem that Mr. Bauer faces, not just this morning, but moving forward, is that more than 65% of his own base, self-describing evangelical Christians under the age of 33, support marriage equality. 80% of people in this country, right, left, Democrat, Republican, man, woman, support marriage equality. More than 60% of all Americans, everyone, supports marriage equality. And that very same activist court that he railed against with such hostility this morning always sides on the side of freedom. They're the very same court that overturned gun bans for overreaching. They're the very same court that overturned campaign finance reform for overreaching. So we can despise the court for its activism when we don't like their behavior. But we can't say that this is a court that always sides on the side of liberals.
Nicole, let me pick up on this.
You can interrupt me all you want, but the truth is you are at odds with
that's me. That's me. Nicole, that's me. It's not Gary. But I'm just trying to play traffic cop here. Would you like to see the court rule that there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage? And what about the argument that if you do that, that you preempt the political debate that is going on in this country? I want to put up a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Justice Ginsburg, who was a big supporter of abortion rights, but has problems with Roe versus Wade. And she said, it's not that the judgment was wrong, but it moved too far, too fast. She says the reason we're still arguing about abortion 40 years later is because it came down through a judicial fiat when it was being worked out by the states.
Yeah, look, I think that we all know, especially from watching the healthcare decision that just came down, that there are about, I don't know, 10 different things that this court could do. They could strike down narrowly the Prop 8 decision. They could have a more broad ruling, and we'll wait and see what they do. But what's going to happen in this country is that eventually there will be nobody left to book on a show like this to debate both sides of the issue. Eventually, as time marches on, this is a country that believes pretty squarely in marriage equality.
But if that's the case, then why not just let the state legislators do it and not ask the court to declare some overwhelming new constitutional right?
Well, you just heard from Rand Paul. Legislatures are about 10 years behind the public. So I think Senator Paul just gave you a pretty good reason not to do that. But I can't instruct the Supreme Court what to do. We'll see what they do this week.
Okay.
Well, Chris, that's exactly what the brief does. It does try to instruct the Supreme Court what to do. And quite frankly, the argument that the public is overwhelmingly in favor of same-sex marriage, Chris, is ludicrous. 33 states have voted to keep marriage the union of one man and one woman. You touched on the key issue here. If it was so obvious that the American public wants to try a radical social experiment that results in children in those households definitely not having a mother and a father, that's what makes marriage a special institution. It guarantees that children have mothers and fathers. If the opinion of the American public was so overwhelming, the gay rights movement and their allies like Nicole would not be asking the Supreme Court to say to the American people, you have no say on this issue. We're going to decide it here in Washington, D.C.
But wait a minute. The Washington Post had a new poll out this week. Let's take a look at what it said. And I take your point about the fact that the vast majority of the states have banned it. 58% now think same-sex marriage is legal. 36% illegal. 10 years ago, the numbers were the reverse. 37% legal, 55% legal, and there's a big generational shift. Look at this. Among people between the ages of 18 and 39, the margin is 70% to 27. Now, I'm not suggesting that, big, deep moral and constitutional issues should be decided by polls, but you're also a Republican in addition to being a social conservative. Do you worry that this only puts the Republican Party further out of touch with the mainstream of American voters?
No, I'm not worried about it because the polls are skewed, Chris. Just this past November, 4 states, very liberal states, voted on this issue. My side lost all 4 of those votes. But my side had 45, 46% of the vote in all 4 of those liberal states. In fact, those marriage amendments that I supported that would keep marriage a man and a woman outran Mitt Romney in those 4 liberal states by an average of 5 points.
All right. And
let me say on the point of the Republican Party.
We're out of time, and I've got to go to Nicole. I just want to ask one final question. How important, and again, I don't think that the politics of this should be the determinative factor and hopefully won't be in the Supreme Court. How important do you think same-sex marriage is as a gateway issue for Republicans maintaining credibility with new, younger voters?
I think what's most important is that the debate remain civilized, that it remain intellectual, that it remain this debate about the role of marriage in our life. And I think that we have to have room in our party for both Mr. Bauer and me.
Well, on that note of unusual agreement, Nicole, Gary, thank you both. Thanks for talking with us, and we'll hear what the justices have to say when they consider these two cases this week. Thank you both.